Wow, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up. This is On Cons. I'm Chuck Pino, and today we're talking about the different formats of comic books. And I have an amazing panel here. This is as stacked as your most favorite porn star. I know that it's going to be fairly dry material, but I have to tell you, just in hanging out with these people and chatting with them, there's so much information and there's so much fun. You guys are going to have a terrific time. So first I'm going to go around the room. Everyone's going to introduce themselves, and then we'll start chatting. Frank, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Oh, you're going to put the pressure on me to go first?
Oh, yeah, you're first, man. Bring it on.
I'm Frank Martin. I'm a writer, comic creator. I also a novelist. I write prose and stuff. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm at Frank the Writers, all my social media handles, franktherwriter.com. I dabble in a little bit of everything, fantasy, horror, sci-fi, comedy. I just like writing stuff. And I've done floppy books. I put trades together of those floppy books. So I like to put my own stuff together, which I think is a lot better than trying to go through a publisher.
Terrific. All right, Angela, you're next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Angela Audling. I am an illustrator and webcomic creator. I am at Angela Audling on pretty much all social media platforms, and you can find my webcomic detached on Tapas and on Webtoon. I create all of my comics pretty much from my iPad Pro, so if you're looking for budget and on-the-go comic making, I am your go-to gal.
All right. Clay, let's hear what you got.
Hey everybody, I'm Clay Adams. I'm a writer and co-creator of Fried Comics. We make offbeat, irreverent pulp fiction, and you can find us at friedcomics.com, and I'm on Twitter at Clay's Evil Twin.
Oh, that's great. I love that handle. All right, John, my man, what's up?
Yeah, I'm John Westhoff. I was the former publisher for about 10 years for Kingbone Press. So you can find us on the internet, although our website is now gone, so I guess I don't exist. And now I'm just continuing to create my own comics, like Frank was saying. Never really had an interest in putting it out there for other publishers, so we've always just kind of done it ourselves. And yeah.
Wow, all right. And last but certainly not least, my mentor and editing guru, Steve Cole. What's up?
Well, I don't know if I can follow up with that.
Done.
I'm Steve Cole. I've been an editor and instructor of graphic narration for over 30 years to comic creators, publishers, and other editors. Former retailer in the comic industry, been publisher, been editor-in-chief, submissions editor all over the place. And I do a lot of consulting. I'm also the administrator and founder of the Comic Book Editors Alliance Facebook group, which concentrates on focusing on editors and comic book editing in particular.
All right, terrific. Why don't we start with the easy spot? And when people consider comics, they think about floppies first. So why don't you guys jump in a little bit? Tell us about the making of floppies and formatting and all that kind of goodness. Who'd like to jump in first?
I'll go first.
All right.
So when you're considering floppies, or when I'm considering floppies, there's kind of two main components that I think of. One is the story itself, because you're looking at how many pages you want the story to be. Typical comic stories, I guess, or I should say Marvel script or a DC script, you're looking at 20 pages. But it could go anywhere, 22 pages, 24 pages, even more, even longer if you want to do 32 pages. But if you're actually self-publishing this book, if you're getting out there, you have to be considerate of what the overall page count is, because obviously books have to be printed in divisibles of 4. So if you have a 24-page book or a 24-page story, the story is going to end right at the last page, which for me personally, I'm not really like a fan of that. Like I feel when I'm reading a Marvel book or a DC book, they have a little bit of back matter or something in there just to kind of soften the blow towards the end. So I like to consider them a little shorter, just so that I could get a page or two in there of either a pinup or a letter page or a coming soon, just something to kind of round it out, just so that you don't end it on that one spot.
All right, cool.
Piggybacking on that, I just want to say, like, that's a great thing to keep in mind about the back matter, just because when you're creating floppies as an indie creator, hopefully, or even if you're Marvel and DC, you're creating it to eventually to compile into a trade, right? So you want to provide something, some reason for the reader to want to get that floppy, right? And not just sit around and wait for the trade. So you want to provide them a little extra value. And then beyond that too, a thing to think about is the cover, just in terms of, just to get technical. Is your cover super fancy? Are you using like a thick stock for the cover, or are you doing what's called a self cover, which is the same type of paper that you use for the interior pages? That all, is about the production value of the book, and affects what you can charge and what you can't charge. Like a self cover, you're not going to charge as much as like a big fancy thick stock, or same with interior stock pages.
Right. When Clay says self cover, it means the same thickness as the pages on the inside. So there's a lot you can do with that. You could do, I've done cardstock thick, we were just talking before we went live about, it was a hardcover, but die cut covers, you can do that. There's a whole, things you can do to, like Frank said, what are you presenting? What kind of story? Is this for a trade? Is this a single? I've done Xeroxed and stapled my own comics. We've done 40-page one-shots, so you can go, a little thicker than a standard issue. I think up to like 52 pages without it really, bending and warping. So yeah, you can pretty much do anything in that format. Might be why, comics have kind of stuck to that. You could do it in different sizes. I've done magazine size, 8.5 by 11, standard American comic sizes, 10.25 by 6.75 or something like that. You can do it in any kind of format you want. You can do little mini comics. We've done little, 3-inch by 4-inch, again, self-stapled, hand them out. They're 4 to 8 pages, just a little fun little stories. You could really, that's part of the greatness of comics, right? You can pretty much do anything you can with paper and pen and ink. So don't limit yourself to how you do it, but do think about what you want to present before, because if you go into the project and then it's something that's really not going to work as a single issue floppy, then you don't want to do that. So
yeah, I want to add something onto what Clay was talking about before about the paper stock. There is one publisher right now called Alternative Comics who has gone back to using newsprint. And one of the problems with newsprint is if there's a lot of chance for bleeding, which means that the paper actually soaks up the ink. And one of the disadvantages to that and the bleeding is sometimes the text will actually bleed and make it seem kind of hard to read. And the same thing with some of the colors. The colors don't come out properly. So paper stock is really important as well.
I want a question for Steve.
Shoot.
So when you're talking about you having issues, is those one-offs for a book, or is it if those errors occur, would it be throughout the entire run?
It depends on the paper stock. Like I said, I find there have been a number of titles that Alterna Comics, for example, has published where some of it is very crisp. The line work is thin enough that when it's printed, it doesn't bleed, and it's still very legible, both the art and the lettering. And there have been others where the bold letters in balloons have bled so much that they're unrecognizable characters. So it really depends on what font they're using and if they're using bold and stuff.
So the error that could take place, it could be within the art itself, not necessarily something that happens in the printing process.
It doesn't usually happen during the printing process. The problem is that a lot of creators, and this is something that Marvel and DC have dealt with as well, when they're talking about the coloring process, they need to make sure that the coloring process for this stock paper is completely different than the coloring process for this stock paper. There was a point where I think it was Batman number 50 had the old glossy stock, and then right after that they had Catwoman number 1, which went to the matte stock. And Chris Sotomayor was talking about in one of his articles about how colorists have to think how their coloring processes are going to go, because if it's on that matte stock, it won't have the same treatment. You won't see the same color variations, or they won't appear the same, or they might bleed a little bit, stuff like that. So the processes are completely different.
Okay. Angela, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I actually wanted to, I heard John talking a little bit about how like you can use like different sizes of comics, like you can do postcard size or, you know, weird little things. And something that I found helpful for myself whenever doing like floppies is sort of more like a zine medium whenever we're talking about floppies, because I myself work primarily on webcomics. So I don't have a book to present to people. But what I usually do is I'll pick out a cardstock and have something screen printed onto it. So it sort of has this more of like an artistic feel. And that sort of just adds like another element that could get people interested in your comic if you don't necessarily have like a book of your main comic that you're doing, but just something like extra, like an extra easy to make sort of collectible piece to add on. And you could do a bunch of different custom things with that as well.
Can I show everybody something before you continue?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, go ahead.
That's a typical comic. Whoops, let me try and get it in frame here. Okay, that's typical comic size, which is standard dimensions. However, there's been a lot of comics now that are going the magazine size, which is basically the 8.5 by 11 sheets, just standard size letter paper. And these actually allow you more flexibility with regards to the size of your panels and the size of your text and stuff. And I find there's a couple of publishers, including DC, who are going this particular direction. And it was really popular during the 70s with books from Marvel, like Savage Swords of Conan and stuff like that. So they're also popular as an alternative for floppies.
I'm working on something with that magazine size right now, and one thing to keep in mind with that is that you want to think about your format before you create the book. So you want to go ahead and create at those bigger dimensions if that's what you're going to do.
Exactly.
So that's really cool. I love that. And so when we're talking about that size, would that also be like, say, something that Heavy Metal does? Is that the size of a magazine that you're talking about?
I believe so. Like,
like Heavy Metal or Creepy, Eerie, you know, those old like, you know, Warren books, Vampirella.
Yeah.
It's a cool format.
Now,
like right now, sorry, DC has actually gone and done a lot of their, what's it called? The Black Label books.
Yeah.
Which are the cardboard stock covers, but it's in that larger size, and it's a really nice presentation. And I'm not in frame here, but it's a really nice prepresentation.
I love how we're just talking about books. He's just gonna whip something out of his side. Yeah, I got it right here.
Dude's got a dang library. I love it. So while we're talking about floppies right now, I would love to mention ash cans. Does anybody can anybody give us a good explanation of what an ash can is, just to kind of tell people, oh, look at that. All right, John, you're the man. Jump on that one.
So, like I said, you can have these printed, obviously, ash can size, which is essentially just an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper folded over. So we actually Xeroxed and copied the internals, and then just did a cardstock cover printed. Luckily, you know, my comics partner Bob Gar is able to get a lot of stuff through his work, but yeah, I was able to just kind of Xerox these on my own, fold it over, get you a long arm stapler. I might even have mine. I mean, if we're pulling stuff out, just get yourself a long arm stapler and you're good to go. Don't let anything limit you. Figure out a way to get it out there.
If someone were to ask you, what is an ash can? What would your definition be?
My definition would be like it's shorter in volume. Like this is a complete story, but usually an ash can is like a smaller version of a larger book, like a teaser, a snippet. Maybe somebody has a book coming out and they don't want to do a full print run of a regular size comic book. So they're going to do, you know, an ash can. They're going to print it up it's cheaper, it's quicker, it's small, you know, you can charge less and just kind of get it out there. That's my definition of what an ash can is, you know, being a 90s kid and growing up, getting the little image ash cans, you know.
So
Go ahead, Steve.
The origin of the term ashcan actually came from the Second World War, where the American government would send off these mini comics to the soldiers that were easily disposable once they were read. And that's where the term ashcan came from. During the 80s, 90s, there were a lot of small press companies that were using ash cans as their primary print run. And the reason being is that the cost for it was actually quite low. You don't have to, you just use a photocopier kind of thing. Make your own. You can do them in black and white or in color. When I was publishing back in the early 90s, we used them when we were promoting the books that were actually going to come out in the larger standard sizes. And we would have the cardboard stock, and we'd just have regular paper stock on the inside, black and white. And they work wonders. A lot of the publishers now will use these ash cans to send out to the retailers. And they're introductory for the retailers, and also you can give them away at a store level to your customers so that it promotes the book that is upcoming.
And you wouldn't think it'd make a difference, but man, it is so much easier to ship these little names. You just slap a stamp on it, shove it in an envelope.
Exactly. You know, and there are some books. There are some books that DC is putting out right now that are actually, when they send out the ash can to the retailer, it's the actual size, dimension-wise, of what the actual book will be, especially for young readers. And so it'll show a specific number of pages just as an introduction, but that'll be the actual size that the readers can expect.
Cool. Dude. All right. So for those of you out there watching, we appreciate it. Thank you. And if you guys have any questions, I am watching I'm watching on my laptop. So if you guys have any comments, feel free to hit me up, and I will gladly ask this absolutely amazingly intelligent panel, and we'll get on to that. Now, I feel like floppies are kind of like a gateway drug for comic creators. You know, I know that I'm going to get a really great argument for webcomics from my good friend Angela, and we are going to get to that. But for now, since we are on the topic of floppies, once you've gotten some and say you've gotten a good arc out, then you want to move on to your trades. So why don't we start with Clay? What can you tell us about trades?
Yeah, so kind of as Chuck just said, right? So the trade is maybe a collection of a full arc. Traditionally, the way this has happened, right? Like in the old days, the comic companies would just focus on the monthly comics, and the books or the collections weren't really a thing, right? They eventually figured out they could make more money by putting out these collections of the old books. This was popular for many reasons because, one, the old floppies would go up in price. So people couldn't afford to buy these stories and read them, right? So the publishers can produce these books, put them out in an affordable, attractive format that people can keep buying. And you'll see, with Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, these books can stay in print for many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. This, for an indie creator, the movement from floppies to trades, I think, is really where things become profitable. Like when I do the floppies for Fried Comics, we're mostly paying for the art through that, okay, and trying to mostly cover our costs for the production of the book. But we don't really start to see, massive returns on it. But then once you start to get that trade, everything's already paid for, and then you're selling those at conventions, and now you're starting to make some money. So it's a good money maker for not only indie creators but also the big companies as well.
Mm-hmm. Something I want to add to that is something that I consult publishers to do is create once, sell many times. Many different ways of doing it, whether it's trades, whether it's web comics, any way that you can use that one material that you've created and sell it through a whole bunch of different ways is how you make your money.
So I had I wouldn't say we're jumping too far off topic, but I had a very interesting experience for my college internship. I did an internship at Archie Comics. And one of the things that Archie puts out is they put out their famous digest, which is essentially stories that they printed decades ago. And they're just recycling old material. They're not paying for it. It's theirs. They just compiling it into a book, and they're sending it out to a new generation because Archie fans are typically on the younger side. So every 10, 15 years or so, they basically have a new readership that they could just feed the same material. And one of my jobs as the intern over there was stories that are, I would say, maybe would be okay 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, or not necessarily okay to print now. So basically they had me read stuff and censor it for non-PC material.
That's awesome.
And start pulling it out, be like, yeah, you can't use that word today. So that was just one of the fun jobs that I had over there. But yeah, I was amazed at how much money they were making, basically just reprinting stuff for a new generation that had no idea that this stuff was around. They think it's brand new, but it's just the same stuff going over and over and over again.
And that's what DC is doing with these 100-page giants that they're selling at Walmart. Yeah. They're putting in a very few pages of brand new content, but most of it is reprints. And so all of that stuff is already paid for. They're not spending a whole lot of money on it. It's printed on relatively cheap paper, and so they can sell 100 pages for $5, and it's great for them, and it's great for the reader.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Cool. So we've got our floppies down. We've got our trades down. Why don't we go ahead and jump to webcomics, because that's a massive undertaking. I know that there's an awful lot to talk about that. So, Angela, I want to jump to you, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your world in webcomics and kind of what you've seen going on there.
Okay, so I started out reading webcomics, so that's how I got into comics in the first place. You know, I didn't really start out with Marvel or DC. I started out with some random comic called Nightmare Pro Wrestling that I found online in 2004. So for me, it's sort of this thing where my life is so ingrained in just like social media and online, and everything's always been online for me. So how we were sort of talking about like some floppies or whatever being the gateway, webcomics was my gateway, because at this point you can just kind of hop onto Instagram or hop onto Twitter and you have like a 4-panel comic that takes you 3 seconds to read, but you have 1,000 of them at your disposal. So you can sort of get addicted to these little stories that, you can just whip out your phone and take a look at them on your lunch break, or if you're just lounging around your house being lazy like I do a lot of the time. But you also have other webcomics now on like Tapas and Webtoon, where they're sort of like a graphic novel format, where they are being released every week and they have a chunkier story. So not only do you have these 4-panel little funny comics or slice of life comics that you can read really, really fast, but you also have these stories that you can get engulfed in and come back, week after week and have a large portion of it free to read. So my whole thing with Detached is it is like a graphic novel and it's online, and you have to have a full story written out and you have to have your templates made and everything like that, so that you can come back and update and grow your audience ship.
And have you ever printed it?
I have not.
Is there any plan to print it? Or when you do the planning, are you saying, well, I might print this out an issue, so I should do like 20-page story, or I might just go to a trade, so I'll just finish it when I finish it?
So I think that's a great question, because I think that it's definitely something that a lot of webcomic creators, they either forget to think about or they don't really know how to think about it. For me personally, I have redrawn Detached 6 times. Just because I never was sure what I was going to do with it. But whenever I, realized, hey, there's a possibility that in the future I would want to print this, for everybody out there that is making webcomics and that hasn't started yet, and that hasn't redrawn their comic 6 different times, keep in mind that just because right now vertical scrolling is the webcomic format that's popular, you can create a book format and then reformat it very easily in Photoshop. You can pick colors that are printable, CMYK, and keep that in mind before you go jumping into it, so that you do have that option. Once you upload to the web, then you do have the option that you can print it later.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to ask Angela, is there a preferred style that you use? Do you use
that? I mean, that's
what's that?
I think Chuck's lagging a little.
Okay, I was wondering.
I am. Go ahead.
Panel by panel presentation, or do you prefer doing the entire page that's visible on the screen? I know there's a Tapas is one way, and so for yourself, do you prefer that single panel at a time?
So I started out making detached. I was just uploading it as if it was a book page. But I did realize that whenever you're looking at a comic on the phone or on the desktop, it is much more beneficial, and the pacing is a lot better whenever you have that one panel at a time and you're sort of scrolling down. So what I do is I draw the entire page as if it was going to be printed as a book template, and then I reformat the panels in Photoshop to be that vertical so that you're seeing them one at a time. So I kind of do both at once.
Okay. Yeah. I recently saw AWA as a new publisher who just released a couple of books, and one of their titles, they did a digital version where they did the single panels, and because it went from being print with the white gutter space and everything, when they modified it to the digital version, it looks so weird, but that's like reverse engineering instead of actually creating two different formats.
Yeah, it can definitely like end up being really weird if you don't plan it from the start. And it like, trust me when I say that if you do not plan to do both, it's a real hassle to go back and reformat. So my biggest advice is just like, if you even have a little bit of an inkling that you might want to print it, definitely think of that way from the start, and just make sure that you're formatting it in a way that you could end up doing both.
Yeah, like one of the first things when I started, I was like, oh, webcomics is easy. You put it up for free. I'll get all these fans. So I started this comic, World's Strongest Mailman. And my idea was I only read traditional comics. So I was doing a traditional size page, and I would print them out as issues as I went. And they were these little short stories. So many mistakes were made. I didn't really format it for web. And then I tried to print it as a full-size book. And then when I went to the trade, I wanted it to be digest size because it was more for younger readers. So I thought that would be cool and cheaper. So the font sizes were not where they needed to be, end up relettering because, a smaller digest you can't really read. And on the web, it looked huge, but in your hands, it was small. So yeah, please, like she said, learn from other people's mistakes like ours. Think ahead so that you're not doing the extra work. In the end, if you can. Sometimes that is the way you learn, right? You make the mistake, and that's how it kind of absorbs with you. So sometimes you have to do that. But yeah, if I could say, think ahead. If this is going to be in multiple formats, how can I make it work in all of them, and try to do that?
If I could say one more thing, just piggybacking off of what John said, please, for the love of God, make a font. It is, I was handwriting my entire comic. I did that for 3 years, and my tendinitis is so freaking bad. If you Google it, you can just Google make my own font, and then you'll get a template. Just make your own font for the comic, or, have a letterer do it for you, because even if it's for a webcomic, please do that. It'll really save the trouble for you.
Or there are amazing Blambot, Comic Craft. They make amazing fonts. Pick a good one. It'll be the best investment. You're like, oh my God, $40 for a font, $80. They have sales on New Year's Day. Comic Craft does every year. Get you a couple of good fonts and pick one that works, so you don't have to go back and redo it.
I kind of have a question for everybody. This is kind of an open-ended question that as a writer and kind of a storyteller idea man. When I first come up with an idea, my main question I have to ask myself is, what medium is this story best told in? And I work primarily in prose and comics, so I could write a short story, a novel, a serialized story, a comic, whether or not that comic is going to be a miniseries or one shot or a graphic novel. And talking about webcomics, somebody who really hasn't explored webcomics fully. I mean, I've worked on comics and I've uploaded pages, but I don't really count that as a webcomic. I'm kind of thinking, if I have an idea and I decide this is going to be a comic, at what point does it verge off between I want to do a traditional comic or do I want to do a webcomic? Whether or not the story dictates which format it should really go to.
And I didn't always adhere to the, like a lot of people say webcomics, there has to be like panel to panel, page to page, something to keep the reader turning. I didn't always adhere to that, but I do feel like that is probably a philosophy that best works. Take advantage of the webcomic that it is one page in front of them, give them a reason to turn it rather than they're holding 20 pages in their hand. They're probably going to keep turning. I guess you could say that for every comic really, but specifically for webcomics. But yes, I, as somebody who was a novice at the time, I didn't adhere to that, but I don't know if Angela or other people really stick to those kind of things.
I'm thinking more along the lines of not so much technical aspects of page turns, but storytelling. So when you think of a manga, you can come up with a story and you say, this is a uniquely manga story, something that really adheres to the style of the storytelling. And I'm wondering, for webcomics, is there a style to the storytelling of the characters, of the plots, of the settings that would uniquely make it fit better as a webcomic than as a traditional print book?
I think that, and this is something that I've learned just from sort of, I pitched Detached to Tapas to see if they would pick it up as a premium comic. And I think that what I've learned is that there are certain storytelling methods or certain styles of storytelling that work best. And what I've discovered is, like, if it would do well as a 10-minute cartoon, then it would probably do well as a webcomic, because it's sort of the same style. I kind of think of webcomics almost the same as, like, if you were storyboarding something, storyboarding an animated series. So it's these really, since you only get one big panel at a time most of the time, especially for very popular webcomics, it's the same as, like, in this scene this happens, in this scene this happens. So whenever you're getting a story that is like a manga, mangas do very, very well on webcomics, like on Webtoon and stuff, because they have that very dramatic storytelling style to them. It also has a lot to do with like psycho thrillers do well and romances do well. Things along those lines. And I think that it just has a lot to do with that. Like, if this was an animated series, every single panel has to keep that reader going. I think partially just because of how much limited space you have, but also, like, you're reading a webcomic, so they don't have this book that they feel obligated that they have to read. They can switch over to another tab at any point. They can just, stop reading at any point. It's just in, like, the ethos.
I'd like to add something to that. I'm getting back all. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is, I don't know why I'm getting feedback. One of the reasons that film and comics are so different is because you go from a motion medium to a static medium. And I find that there are certain techniques. For example, in film, there's a technique called match cutting, which, for example, at the end of one scene, you have a door closing, and the very next turn of the scene, you have a door open. One of the techniques that I use in teaching about comics is match cutting. For example, you have an extreme close-up of somebody's eyes at the end of one scene, and then you turn the page, and there's an extreme close-up of similar eyes, but it's somebody else. So it's a matching visual technique in many ways. I don't see that working as much in webcomics, especially with a scroll, because you'd be going from one match cut to another and then kind of wondering, okay, well, wasn't I just here? Now I'm here. You know, you kind of need that print medium in order to appreciate it more. And that don't work.
Frank, I think beyond like techniques and things, and I think Steve and Angela have like done great explaining those techniques. For me as a creator, I always answer those sort of questions of like what kind of story this is or what medium is, just like what excites you. If you're excited by webcomics, do webcomics. If you're excited by doing traditional print comics, do traditional print comics. So like if you don't have that passion, it's not going to translate to the page. So just you do you, man.
Yeah.
Are you saying, Clay, and that's a really interesting point. Are you saying that even like the format can be very much its own passion, so to speak, and so you kind of want to follow that one?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, so I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a project now that's the magazine size, and that all just came about by, going to Comic Cons and seeing some old, Vampirellas and Creepies and Eries and thinking like, this is a really cool format. And then noticing, as Steve said, that DC has started to do it with the Black Label stuff and the new Question comic book and the Joker stuff that they're putting out. And just thinking that's a really beautiful presentation. And so the format was what excited me. And so that started me thinking like, well, okay, what kinds of stories work in this format? So then now we are talking about some of the technical stuff that Angela and Steve were talking about, right? And so my co-creator on this project, we were tabling together at a comic convention and we just started kicking around ideas, but it came from the format. And it came from what stories tend to work well in this format. And then the story honestly like wrote itself from there. And anyway, it can be very exciting if you just follow that.
That's always a cool thing, Clay, when you start with a presentation first and then you work backwards to develop your project.
Yeah. I find sorry, there goes the feedback again. I find as well that when I'm coming up with a story, because I write as well, sometimes I'll figure out, okay, well, how would this story best be told? Is it better in film? Is it better as a webcomic? Is it better as a single 98-page comic or as a miniseries broken up? Or, so really, not only is it how the story can be told, but also who that market is going to be that will best appreciate it. So, for example, if I'm going to write a miniseries, okay, then I want to make sure that it's people who buy floppies, first of all, and who don't want the financial investment of having to buy a regular series. As long as they know that it's limited, they're more apt to buy it. However, those who want the immediacy of story are going to buy an original graphic novel. Those that want the digital format that's transportable, that they don't have to worry about holding a physical copy, then the webcomic is a good way of going. So really your story and your market are tied together. Okay. And if you create a story that doesn't tailor to that particular format, then you're not taking advantage of your market.
It's funny that you guys say that because one of our commenters actually had a really good point. Good buddy of mine, shout out to Zach Gray there. He said, you ask a tricky question. I think the idea was that a comic in any medium was structured to follow the traditional method. But as comics evolved, it expanded outside of the box. And I think we're seeing a lot of that even in the different formats and in webcomics as we talk about it and all that kind of stuff. So that was a really interesting thing to jump on with.
One of the things I love is comics as a creator is when I'm writing prose and I'm writing a novel, I like having tools in my toolbox to play with and tell a story, to do different things. There's only so much I could do with a novel or a short story. With comics, there's so much to play around with on the page, between layouts, between formats, between ways the book is being held together with perspectives. you just have as a storyteller, you have a lot more tools in your toolbox. And as time goes on and more creators do more different things, it's exploded compared to what comics were a couple decades ago, even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we did some web comics. Why don't we talk about, because it was just mentioned, graphic novels. So who would like to jump in and weigh in on a good old graphic novel?
Okay, well, first of all, graphic novels, there's such a wide variety on the length of story. You know, I've seen 200-page graphic novels. I've seen 72-page, which is basically 3 24-page comics put together, you know, and so it really depends on what kind of story you want to tell, and do you want to grab those novel readers, for example, those ones who read prose? They're the ones who are going to be more interested in the longer fiction. The shorter fiction are the comic book readers, you know, because they get the short 3-issue arc kind of thing in that 72 pages. So graphic novels are a great way of doing things. I find, too, that graphic novels of longer form have, I was talking before about markets. You have the comic specialty stores, you have the bookstores, where the floppies aren't sold at the bookstore. They have that cross retail appeal.
One of the a graphic novel market that I'm really interested in, and I would have never known about this if I didn't have kids of my own, because I don't remember as a kid having access to these middle grade level graphic novels that are really, I find, have been taking off recently. They're very, very popular. And I this past summer especially, every couple of days I would go to the library with my son and he would pick one out and we would bring it home. And I was super, super impressed with the quality of these things. The storytelling was so good. He was engaged. I was engaged. We were having a great time. A couple nights just to read them before bedtime. And I don't remember having access to these things as a kid. I mean, I remember reading Simpsons graphic novels that were filled with eat my shorts jokes just every single day. These are really great and sci-fi tales, and a lot of them are goofy, and we have a whole lot big blast reading them. So I think that's a huge market that I find has become extremely profitable as you see traditional publishers like Scholastic get into these markets.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. And what's so great about that is that they can now come into the schools, right? Because comic book stores, there are only so many in the United States. Like I live 45 minutes away from the closest comic book shop, and that's not always convenient for me to get to. When I was a kid, right, I'd be tagging along with my parents to the grocery store, the pharmacy, and I could find comic books on the rack there, or the Archie digests that Frank was talking about.
Showing your age there, Clay.
I am. I'm dating myself, but you know, I think the gray does that just fine. But back in my day. But now the markets are so different that in order to reach that younger audience, now that they have these formats, they can come and they can do the school book fair. And
that's where my son gets his Dog Man books from.
Exactly. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and that particularly is taking advantage. I bought my son some floppy comics. We went to the comic shop. He's gotten some. Never really got into it. Read the Oz books, but then once he got Dog Man, now he likes comics. Now he reads them all the time. He rereads them because they want that whole thing. They don't want a single issue, come back a month later. That doesn't work for a kid. Barely works for adults now, I guess we could argue. So that's just really smart that a bunch of people have jumped on that and said, wait a minute. Kids will read this. This is how we'll get kids into it. Started with stuff like Bone, and I'm sure there's other examples, but yeah, now Dog Man, and like you said, they're of quality. Some of them may not be my favorite stories, but definitely engaging for kids their age.
Yeah. Well, one of the things. Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because my kiddo came home. She had this one, Wings of Fire, and it's a graphic novel, but I had, always been trying to show her. I've edited some kids' books and stuff. So I was like, would you like to check out this kid's comic? I don't like comics. Oh, all right, fine. You try, but then no. And then she brings this thing home, And like, look at it. Like, guys,
That's
it's a freaking comic.
Comic.
You know what I mean? She's like, this is amazing. I love it. And I was like, that's a comic. She's like, no, it's not, Daddy. It's a graphic novel. And I'm like, why we're doing this panel, guys?
There is a distinction, and I've never written specifically for a longer form story, not broken up, and that is something I'm interested in too, because I think that storytelling is going to be different than a miniseries just collected. Yeah.
I mean, for example, when I'm talking to some of my clients about doing either a miniseries or an original graphic novel, I tell them, well, first of all, who first of all is your market? I say, if your market are the comic book readers and you want to do a long story, 6 issues, okay, you can do it as the floppies and then create the trade. But if your reader is not the standard comic book reader, not the floppy reader, then go straight to a graphic novel, and I mean, you can reverse engineer that as well, using that term again, where you can take that original graphic novel and separate it into individual books, depending on your page count and where your hooks and everything per chapter are. Okay. But ultimately it comes down to who your reader is going to be. Okay. And how they're going to be able to access that story.
And do you find when you make that advice, what's the ultimate decision that they make? Is it more about what the writer wants?
It really depends, because every time that I have a conversation with a new client, I'm always starting off with, who is your market? Is it female readers over the age of 20? Is it kids around 12, 13 years old, or the preteen market? Are they, boys who are action-oriented and have to have superheroes? Or is it a girl reader, female reader, who's looking more for characterization and story? That's always a consideration when I'm talking with them. So when I'm also adding on to that is not only you're looking at who your demographic is age-wise and the types of stories that they want, you're also looking at how they buy. And so if their buying patterns are not floppy, but are collected or a complete story, then you're going to go straight for that. Who are the ones who buy the floppies? Okay. It's guys our age, who grew up with the flop comics, and that's why the younger readers, they don't appreciate them as much as we do, because they didn't grow up with them, But when it comes to someone who's looking for a complete story, and I'm not trying to monopolize here, when someone's looking for a complete story, they're going to want it bang all in one volume. One of the disadvantages I find, for example, of selling floppies at a convention, I don't know if that's something that you're going to be talking about, Chuck, but quite often I've gone to a table where they have a copy of issue number 1, they're missing number 2, they have number 3, they don't have number 4, okay? Because
that's happened to us many times.
Exactly, and me too. I've seen that happen so many times, not only as a publisher but also as a reader. And if you're going to a convention, you want to make sure that you have a complete story, because more than likely they're either never going to see you again, or they're not going to be entranced enough with the material to want to contact you, via email or whatever, to get the rest of their books. So that's where at a convention you're going to want a complete story, So really it depends on the person. Having dealt with dozens of people and talking about how they want to format it, long form, individual floppies, it's very specific to those particular creators. There's no across the board judgments.
I think this kind of piggybacks a little bit off of what Steve was saying with the conventions. When you're in the market and you're putting stuff out, floppies are a very useful tool. But if something's going to stand the test of time, the thing that comes to mind is Watchmen. Watchmen's a book people say it's one of the greatest graphic novels of all time. It's a miniseries. Those are 12 individual issues, but nobody sells every single issue individually. They put the thing out together. They consider it a complete graphic novel, and it's taken off. So although when you're in the heat of the moment and you're putting a book out and it's a single issue floppy. You can capitalize on buzz, putting them out regularly and consistent basis, and really build a fan base. But if you want something that's going to last, if you want something that's going to sell, if you want something that's really going to build an audience for years, if not decades, you really want to have a story that's going to, when it compiles, when it's complete from beginning to end, it's really going to captivate people.
Yeah, and I think that can be daunting as a creator. For myself, I ask that because I often revert back to what I'm used to, and that's the singles, and also the enjoyment of putting it out. You get excited as a creator, you want to put it out in those small dosages just to kind of get yourself going. But you do really want to reflect and say, how is this better sold? How is the story better told? Of course, how is it better sold to my audience? For example, we put out Hellbillies. We put out one single issue. Issue 1 was like 40 pages, way too long. And then we had 15 more issues and didn't until we got this huge book, which is now 400 pages. So really, these are useless. Well, I can hand them out, as a teaser. But yeah, I should have been true to myself from the beginning that the whole story needed to be told. Now, we did do it in digital. So it is online in digital installments on Comixology. So I do think that worked. But I told the story in single issues that wasn't a single issue story. Should have just been an ongoing. Although, again, 400 pages, it took us 5 years to create too. So there was a give and take there. I wanted to at least put something out to keep myself and Brian, the artist, going on it. But maybe that wasn't the best choice. Maybe that was more about my personal feelings.
You know what, John? It's kind of funny you say that because a lot of people are trying experiments with new different things where they have a story that's 6 issues long, but they're only going to print issue 1 to generate buzz, pretty much like a sample, not necessarily an ashcan, but an ashcan in spirit. And then instead of doing issues 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they go from 1 right to the trade. Yeah. And that's kind of a new kind of experiment format that a lot of publishers are toying around with.
I saw Clay's eyes just like that's something if you don't mind. Price point. Okay. Yeah. So at a convention or even on the store shelf, a floppy is a lot less expensive psychologically for the purchaser, okay, than a graphic novel is. So a 400-page graphic novel, yikes, price point, But then there's the waiting time factor for the next issue. It's like episodic or serialized television, So, but Clay, you go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because at conventions, you want to have different formats on your table. You want to have that trade for somebody who's willing to plunk down $20, but you also want to have that floppy for somebody who wants to support you, but they only want to maybe give you $5 right now. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I was actually at a convention a couple of months ago before everything shut down, and I had a bunch of different things on my table. And I was selling certain trades for $20. I was selling something for $5, and I had another series that had a volume 1 and a first issue of volume 2. And I was selling, trying to sell this person on all these things on my table. And the guy looked at the first issue of volume 2 and said, "Is that a first issue?" And I said, yeah, it is. And he was like, "I'll take that." And I was like, yeah. well, this trade is actually like the first volume and you're going to want that too. And he's like, no, I don't want that. I just want the first issue. So John, I don't think that first issue of Hellbillies is a waste of time or anything, because I think you can still sell that to people that want to support and just get a little bit, but they don't want to plunk down the money for that 400-page book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And too,
you never know.
The thing is too that a lot of people use the floppy as a sampler, okay, as an introduction that doesn't take as much time as reading the entire graphic novel, okay. So it isn't just a matter of the price point; it's a matter of, okay, this is a 24-page story, okay. If I want more, I'll get more, okay. But that's the opposite of those who want the entire story in one shot, okay. So it's 2 different markets altogether.
So I put out my series, or my main series is called Modern Testament, and I don't want to say it was a stupid idea, but the way I did it was it's essentially an anthology of a whole bunch of short stories. But I didn't put it out as a trade all at once. I put them out as 4 separate issues of 3 stories apiece, and then 1 trade I combined them all and I added 3 stories, so the trade was 15. So when somebody walks by my table and they're looking for issue number 1, I say, look, they're all short stories. They're not standalone. They're all issue number 1. You can pick up any one you want. So they can really pick and choose which one they want. And if they like them all, they can pick up the trade. So, I mean, it was kind of a weird decision in that I don't have a standard story going along, and there's not something that can follow the issue to issue, but it allows me that leeway in that they're not if they want to start on issue number 1 because they're really focused on that, they don't really have to pick up issue number 1 because all of them are standalone. They could each pick one up and just go with it in the same way that Comics Tribe Sync is different from it.
And I think if you're going to do the anthology, we can talk about, you definitely want to do that. Like we did some larger anthologies like this, and you talk about the most difficult thing ever to sell. You can't explain this. It's not really a graphic novel, even though it looks thick. It's short stories, that we did with a collective of people. And yeah, it just make it easier for yourself. What Frank is describing works a lot better.
So, and somebody had asked, there was a mention there of floppies, but this comes into something that Zach had said, and he said, graphic novels today, if they're the goal, how do you deal with customers who only seek one specific issue? Anybody?
Well, I don't have any customers, so I can't really tell you.
Well, Frank, you go ahead first.
Well, I think the question would need to be more specific. Are you seeking one specific issue of like a past issue, like a back issue is what they're asking about?
I would think so. Yeah, that was my supposition.
That's just, things go out of print, If something's not profitable, people aren't going to print it. So if you want a single issue of something that a publisher doesn't have or that a creator is not going to print, you're kind of SOL, It's just kind of the way it is. People do collect stuff and they do sell them online, but if you contact a creator and say, I have 1, 2, and 3, I'm missing 4, and I have 5 and 6, I need 4 to do my collection, and they're sold out, they're not going to print just one issue just for you. It's not going to.
Right. David Brandsetter's Straw Man is like that. When he sells out, but he prints different runs, and it can be frustrating as a collector, but
yeah. It's not like I'll be like, give me $10 and I'll go call Kablam and get them to make me 5 copies.
I mean, you could. There is print on demand if you really had a lot of people asking.
I keep coming back to,
if you want it bad enough and you're willing to pay for it, I mean, anything is possible.
Yeah, sure.
But I keep coming back to this whole market thing, and the ones who want that first issue are the ones who are the collectors, They don't want the second printing. They don't want the third printing or 7th printing or whatever. They want that first printing, So that's the collectability. There's the collectors and then there's the story readers, So you have to figure out who you're trying to target. Yeah. Is your story something that the collector would want? That's a big question that you have to ask yourself. If you're writing for the story reader, for the reader exclusively, then you don't create a floppy first issue that is going to, especially if you're looking for those collectors who want that first issue and you find out after the fact you don't have enough of them and you've printed 1,000 copies of that first issue, that are still in your garage or under the stairs, kind of thing.
Well,
because
they're here in this closet.
I want to as somebody who's not familiar with webcomics, is there a way for you to monetize them or collectify them for a convention? I don't know if you print limited edition cards with QR codes or if you have some sort of trick or tip to make that happen.
Yeah, I've definitely seen too, because you can kind of think of a webcomic as an ebook as well, if you want to market it that way. I was helping Russell Nolte of Wannabe Press at San Diego for the past couple of years, and he prints out little QR codes or like little almost business cards that people can go and they can scan it and get the ebook. So that's definitely like a technique that you could do for a webcomic or a comic that's specifically you could only get online. I personally do, because I started Detached Out as a zine where I just, hand drew it in Sharpie and then photocopied it myself and screen printed the covers. I'll do little things like that. And just offer them as like a collector's edition, like handmade comic or something like that. So there's definitely ways that you can have like a tangible product without technically printing, having a fully printed comic book or graphic novel or whatever to go along and promote and sway people to read your webcomic.
Yeah. And those ebooks can also be sold on Amazon or Comixology, your own website, and you can also attach your webcomic to like Patreon or however the heck you pronounce it.
Yeah,
right?
Patreon. Mm-hmm.
And monetize it that way.
Yeah. One of the things I just want to address, talking about the webcomics and the convention setting, we had this one convention locally here where there were full tables of product all around this one table. And that one table had a little screen showing their webcomic. There was nothing else on the table. It was basically empty except for this little thing, and they got no attention whatsoever. And so how do you sell or how do you promote a webcomic in that type of setting?
So, like at a convention, just sort of with a bunch of people that have a full table, or
convention, trade show, whatever, public eye.
So this might just be because, I both write and draw my comics. This might just be the artist in me, but obviously if you are the artist or if you have the artist that's accessible, that's willing to make prints, get those prints printed, offer limited editions. It's really easy to just get like 5x7s or 4x6s of the artwork from your comic printed, or have your artist, or if you're doing it yourself, create maybe exclusives for that comic. I know that we did like one of the books that I'm working on, Lucifer Licorice. We've done an exclusive print for each Comic-Con, and they've done really well. And it's just sort of something that can get the audience interested in it without necessarily having to pick up a book. You can also, webcomics are a great reason to get like pins made and patches and stickers and all of those kinds of things. I don't necessarily think that you have to have a printed comic, but you definitely have to have the artwork and the visuals there so that people can get interested in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how you answered that.
I make money off that IP.
Yes, exactly. The merch.
So here's the thing. I know that this panel could keep talking all day. And guys, you've been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Our hour's pretty much up though. I would love for all of you guys, especially with everything that's going on right now, please tell us where we can find all your awesomeness so that we can track it down and enjoy it, because obviously you guys know what you're talking about. Let's do a ladies first and we'll go on from there. Angela, please tell us about you.
Sure. My name is Angela Audling. You can find me at Angela Audling on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. My webcomic is called Detached, and you can find Detached on Webtoon and Tapas. Please comment and subscribe, especially if you watch this panel, and let me know what you thought, because I love reading your guys' comments.
That's amazing. Thank you. Frank, why don't you tell us about you?
I am Frank Martin. You could find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Frank the Writer is my social media handle. FrankTheWriter.com is my website. I have a mailing list. I also have a book on Kickstarter right now, one of those fancy, stupid, floppy anthologies that I put out. It's called Modern Godhood, and we're about spitting distance away from our funding goal. So if you want to check us out on there, I appreciate it.
That's awesome. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm John Westhoff. Like I said at the beginning, company I ran for about 10 years, Kingbone Press, has closed shop recently. So you can find me, what we have left of our stock, on Part-Time Comics with an X, .storeenvy.com. I'm on Twitter at @anti_drummer. So I'm sure you can appreciate me making all these names confusing so you'll never find me. But yeah, just say hi on social media. I'm on social media all the time harassing Chuck, so find me there.
Have Chad go next.
Hey, No, that's all right. So again, I'm Clay Adams and I'm with Fried Comics. You can find us at friedcomics.com. We're also very active on Kickstarter. You can follow us there at Fried Comics, and I'm on Twitter at Clay's Evil Twin.
Okay, and as for myself, Steve Cole, I'm on Facebook independently, and also, like I said at the beginning, I am the administrator and founder of Comic Book Editors Alliance, which you can find the public group on Facebook. To become a member, you just have to send a request. We prefer that it's people who are actually working in the comic industry and want to learn more about the editing process, or hiring an editor, or along those lines. I'm also on LinkedIn as Steve Cole, and my email address is editors plural .ieye.view, so editorsieview@gmail.com.
All right, and I'm Chuck Pino, and if my opinion matters even a little bit to you, I would love for you to be well aware that this panel is made up of people who I have watched for all of my career thus far, who I really love and respect and have enjoyed seeing what they do and what they bring to the community. They're all honestly, genuinely good people who have worked really hard to educate and to put out amazing product. So I'd love it, and I would take it as a personal favor if you guys went out and supported them. If for some reason you want to support me, I am Chuck Pino. You can find me at Chuck E. Pin on Twitter. You can find me here on Facebook. You can find my indie comic reviews on Chuck's Raw Reviews on YouTube. And of course, you can always find me here on OnCons. Thank you so much, everybody. We had a terrific time. And thanks again to my guests. Have a great one. Peace, love, and comics.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.